for taking the time to join us today. I would like to welcome you all to our information session. My name is Brenna Bellick O'Riordan, and I'm excited to share more about the Open Network survey that the Investor Catalyst has open in support of ARPA-H's work in understanding reimbursement and the ecosystem. We'll be discussing the details of that today. As you can see in the chat, you'll find more details about the survey itself and where you can apply. Today, we are joined by two ARPA-H leaders, Arunan and Miriam. Arunan Skandaraja is the Scientific Operations Advisor to the Director of the agency's Commercialization Office, known as PATIO. He leads the office experiments on how to get products to market more quickly. He has also served as a Presidential Innovation Fellow at the FDA, where he led data and AI initiatives. Prior to the government, Arunan led R&D programs in diagnostics, digital health, and distributed care models with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's worked as a management consultant across healthcare sector and earned his PhD in bioengineering at the University of California, Berkeley. Miriam Zayeh is a technology innovator and business leader with over 15 years experience in healthcare and advanced technology. As a startup founder and CEO, she developed the world's first FDA-cleared AI-driven breast health monitoring platform. Currently, she leads the Technology Transition and Transfer Office at ARPA-H, partnering with ARPA-H programs and leadership to ensure high-impact technologies translate to real-world solutions. Miriam also holds a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University and is an alumna of Y Combinator. Her work is dedicated to healthcare access and equity through innovation. Without further ado, Arunan and Miriam.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brenna, and to the IC Hub. We really appreciate you all taking your time on a Friday to join us and really understand, hopefully, a little bit of the why we're launching the survey, why we're interested in really speeding this journey towards medical technology getting to the market. But it's also important for you all to understand a little bit of who ARPA-H is, because that affects what levers we have here, what our unique model is for driving impact and supporting innovators who are out there every day trying to get their solutions into the market, as well as clinicians and payers trying to make the right decisions about what technologies come forward and into the hands of their users. So we'll take some time to kind of frame some of the challenges that we're focused on today, which revolve around getting solutions paid for or reimbursement. And we'll also get into what we're hoping to learn from the survey, what we'll do with the answers, and then ultimately leave, hopefully, the majority of the second half for questions from the group. So why does ARPA-H care about this? ARPA-H's mission is to accelerate better health outcomes for everyone. I think the most visible part of our mission is often the scientific portion, which is to ask, how do we take technologies that are far out in the horizon and bring them from kind of that range of impossible to possible, take those technologies to a point where you can imagine true products and capabilities. But I think, as you all know, as members of the health ecosystem, bringing the science forward is only the first step. And if we're talking about accelerating health outcomes, we need to move into addressing gaps in commercialization. Next slide, please. So while we won't do a full kind of explainer on the ARPA model today, I think it's really important to get a few of the key words, a few of the key components. So I want to try to give you the story that you'll be able to take to your partners and stakeholders and use to kind of interpret where we can impact the journey through this survey. So the core kind of the heart of ARPA-H are our program managers. These are often scientists, entrepreneurs, individuals who are able to bring forward a scientific vision and work across silos and command a room of various experts to deliver on that. These individuals have a real sense of urgency. Part of this is the passion they bring to the problem. It's something that they brought to ARPA-H. It's something that they want to solve and feel like could only be solved at the agency. And part of it's structural, because these program managers are on a term limit. Importantly, program managers and ARPA-H as a whole doesn't manage labs. Unlike the NIH, we don't have internal labs or intramural programs. All of our work, all of the true development is done through external solver teams that we call performers. They're the ones who build things. It can be anyone who's willing to get on a kind of simplified, accelerated contract with us. They can be academics, startups, large businesses, and importantly, they bring a lot of the how. They have their expertise, they have the reason for being in the domain, but the vision, that kind of system that's being built, that is defined by the PM. And that means that unlike a grant where you really have a lot of autonomy to explore the science and report out, you are actually trying to tackle technical milestones that are set by these program managers. And the consequence of that is that we only carry forward teams that are accomplishing those milestones. So there's no guarantee that if you're selected as a funded team, you'll get enough support to kind of prove out your approach, but you may not get the full funding until you kind of hit these milestone payments. When we use the framing of a program, that's really just the kind of combination of these performers. They can be put together in different ways. They can be kind of a bake-off format where you're testing different approaches to the same problem, or you might go across sectors and fields to work on different parts of the system, different parts of the device, the software, the hardware, the delivery model. And there's a lot of creativity in how program managers kind of work across organizations that traditionally don't get to work together to solve these big future-oriented problems. And one thing to continue to emphasize is that it really is program manager up, not bottom down. Our strategy is set across four broad mission areas as well as transition. But beyond that, it's really about individual PMs coming in to kind of shape this vision, get rigorous vetting from our leadership, and then working with the community of performers to deliver that. And these components really come together to define the Advanced Research Projects Agency model, or the ARPA model. It's unique in government because it's not about pure scientific output. We really ask teams to go beyond the science to think about intellectual property, think about products and services. ARPA also holds itself to the line that if somebody else could do it, another private funder, a commercial interest, then we won't duplicate that. We're only kind of going in when there is a market that needs to initially be created, when there's a technical barrier that needs to be overcome, and then we kind of follow these solutions to the future. And that is a future that we are very intentional about what we want to live in. So there's a lot of unique elements to the ARPA model. And with that, it's actually a good time to transition over to my colleague Miriam, who can kind of talk about what we do in commercialization already and some of the problems that we tackle, which is kind of unique to ARPA-H's version of the model.
Thank you, Ronan, for that overview of ARPA-H. At ARPA-H, we have 5 mission offices, and one of those mission offices is Short Patio, which is our Project Accelerator Transition Innovation Office. And we work closely with the other 4 mission offices, which the goal is to push that technical barriers and accelerate better health outcomes for everyone. And how we do that is we work across the program managers and performers to make sure that they are building transition and identifying barriers to transition and commercialization. As you know, ARPA-H will not be funding programs and performers in perpetuity. So it's really important to think about where does a program goes next, and we want to make sure that it reach Americans and the people who need it, and we provide a range of different capabilities to help our program managers and performers with that. Next. So what do we mean by transition? And we think about this in a broader sense. A lot of times, the transition for a program is commercialization, and at the end, the program might transition into a large company or a startup, whether it is brand new or it's backed by venture capital. But there are also some non-traditional transition pathways beyond commercialization, which a program might go to a nonprofit, whether it's a small or large. It may go to a healthcare system. It may go to another government agency. So we think about the transition in a broader sense, and how do we make sure that this program ends up with the next step to go on its path to impact. So we think about when we see a program, we work with the program manager, we think about what is that transition end point and what is that pathway, and then we work backwards towards that goal. Next. So if you think about why a lot of amazing scientific ideas and technologies fail to reach people and become impactful solutions, it's often not because the technology didn't work. A lot of times is because of different factors that were not thought about in parallel with technology development. So we really emphasize as we work with our program managers, thinking about all these different components of turning a scientific idea or technology into an actual impactful product, whether it is manufacturability and pricing, whether it is the IP landscape and freedom to operate, end user and accessibility and affordability of the product. And regulatory pathway obviously is very critical and important. And the business model, is there a reimbursement for this technology or product? What is its affordability and pricing? So these are all really important components that would determine the fate of a technology being successful and sustainable in the long term. We also, as I mentioned, we think about exit plan, not necessarily if it's being acquired or so, but what is the follow-on pathway? Is it an investment by venture capital? Is it licensing to a larger company? There are different formats for that next step for the program, but we really actively work with the program managers to think about all these different components along the path of technology development and scientific breakthroughs that come in to make sure that these don't fall through the gaps. Next. So yeah, I'll wrap up there and pass it back, but I just want to make sure that we really care about that final impact and making sure we accelerate better health outcomes, and we are one component of making that a reality. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam. And I think it's really important to highlight that not only do we think about these elements during program design, but we do more and more, especially through Miriam's D3X division, to kind of support the performers in developing their strategies and getting the expertise they need and getting the partnerships they need to cross those steps. And this network survey is really the evolution of the work that's already happening at ARPA-H and within Patio. And it's our mechanism to say, all right, we've designed a few things, we've tried a few things with both our small business programs and our initial kind of full-scale programs. And we really want to get feedback from the community of folks who might become performers, who might accept technologies or help develop technologies that are led by ARPA-H performers to inform generally the technical and funding approach the agency takes, but specifically new services, new partnerships that ARPA-H can help support. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of problems in getting to market and a lot of things that contribute to that end-to-end timeline from idea to impact. But today we'd like to really focus in on the one that we're trying to drive insight on through the survey. And that is this truly long and variable gap between when a performer is able to attain their FDA kind of stamp of approval, whether that is an approval or clearance or an authorization, and getting to a point where they have a nominal reimbursement. And that nominal reimbursement is sort of the beginning of a tool or a solution being broadly available. And the data on the bottom right, each line represents the time from the kind of FDA submission. If you get a little pink triangle, that means that you've successfully achieved reimbursement. But as you can tell, many of those lines, even over the 7-year window, are still ongoing. Of the companies that were able to successfully achieve reimbursement, the median company took 5.7 years after the FDA to reach that point. This is, to be clear, this data is for what we consider novel technologies, the ones that are using the PMA pathway that require de novo classification. And we expect these timelines to be shorter for things that are more follow-on or more incremental. But a lot of the ARPA model is about truly transformative swings that are challenging, potentially infeasible, but if they're successful, it's a kind of a big if true situation. Um, we also know that a lot of our performers tend to be small organizations, not exclusively. And this data shows that this process is the hardest for the smallest of those organizations, with less than 20% of small device developers being able to get to this threshold within 5 years. We also understand that getting from FDA to broad use is about balancing a lot of different stakeholders. These are stakeholders that are sometimes handled kind of one after the other and sometimes in parallel, but you need to get clinicians on board, users on board, payers on board. And it's truly a challenge to kind of align those types of evidence bases. Um, we also see tremendously variable timelines and know from a business perspective that when additional sources of capital, when acquirers are thinking about building business plans around these technologies, that additional kind of timeline risk on top of the technical risk can make it really challenging to get the funding that's needed to go to market. Next slide, please. So we want to take this data, we want to take our understanding that we've already been building of the ecosystem and kind of turn that back to a challenge. It's something that I think we want to provide our unique contribution to, but is truly an ecosystem-wide effort. And ARPA-H tends to frame things in terms of what ifs. And our what if on this kind of commercialization challenge is, what if transformative medical technologies could obtain broad reimbursement 3 times as fast? This is meant to be a little bit challenging to our mental models of how these steps from coding, coverage, and payment kind of go. It's meant to really ask what silos need to be broken. Because we know that the basic science, the transformative knowledge built by other agencies and by the academic ecosystem is growing very quickly, especially in this age of rapid experiments and evaluation. But we don't want this element to be the kind of time limiter to innovative solutions getting to more patients. And we ultimately want to understand what drives the current timelines and work with you all to hopefully build solutions. And right now we're at that understanding phase, but we hope to gain a lot more in the process of writing the survey towards something that's more solution oriented. Next slide, please. So what's the survey trying to really draw out from you? And some of you may have gotten a sense of this clicking through the survey or looking through any of the materials that are posted. But we're really looking for something from each of several different stakeholders that I'll outline more on the next slide. For the developers, we really want to understand, both for those who've been successful and those who are still very much in the process, what approaches have you taken? Have you brought in a billing specialist? Have you thought about what your clinical trial strategy is and how it spans FDA and CMS, who you've engaged with? We want to understand the timeline so far. How long have things taken for you in the context of your device? How does that vary across disciplines and technology types? And on the other side, we're just as engaged and interested in understanding what is it that delays or drives uptake. We know that clinicians are not averse to change. They follow new technologies. They understand the potential impact for their patients. So what is it that they need to know from the developers of technologies? What is it that payers pay attention to when they're evaluating different types of evidence to understand what they might cover or what they might recommend goes down a value-based pathway or something that fits into a bundled payment? So we really want to draw out those elements, and we want those elements not only for successful technologies, but also hurdles that you've seen overcome. And finally, on this slide, it's really important to acknowledge that there is a lot of innovation happening here, both in our agency partners like CMS and FDA, with the TCEP program, the early payer access, and the TAP program at FDA. And there's a great deal that we've learned about in the last couple of months in what nonprofits and incubators are driving here. So tell us what is successful. What's helped you? What are models that you think, with the right support, with the right scale, potentially supported by ARPA-H, could really help change the average timeline of the most important and transformative technologies that are coming out of this ecosystem? So if we're successful, we'll have gathered this type of real-world insight. We'll have informed new capabilities that we can build that go along with the funding we provide, that kind of in-kind support, supplemental capabilities that help performers truly speed this journey. We hope that this is only the beginning of the conversation and that many of you will become the folks who help us build these capabilities in the end. And we also want real we really want accountability here as well. When we launch something in this domain, we want to be clear on what we're measuring to know that we're truly moving the needle on a process that does take many years. So what are those intermediate milestones? What are those kind of proxy markers that we should be looking for to understand that we are having impact not 5.7 years from now, but in a year, in 3 years from launching these new capabilities and helping to get our performers on the road. Next slide, please. So I've already mentioned a lot of the stakeholders that I think we want to hear from, those kind of developing the technologies, those who are helping as medical technology developers and manufacturers, those that are not only implementing technologies, but are truly part of the evaluation process, helping prototype, helping deploy as clinicians and then as health systems. And we want to hear from payers, insurers, organizations that define benefits, both on the government side in terms of coverage categories, and from the private side in terms of medical plans and their kind of considerations. But one thing I also wanted to highlight is that we realize there is a robust ecosystem in this world. We've met with a range of great consultants and advocates, associations like physician associations that help define whether a solution meets a gap, brings technologies to the rock, to assess it, to establish its value and the amount of work that goes into delivering them. We want to hear from the consultants that are in the trenches with companies that often don't have the staff on board themselves to navigate this process. And we want to understand what advocates who want to see these technologies get into patients like themselves want from this process and what they can really help drive from their unique seat in the ecosystem. Because at the end, this really is about patients and those who advocate for them. Next slide, please. So I want to strike a little bit of a balance on this slide because the true value of this is going to be the unknown unknowns. But to give you a little bit of grounding, these are the types of tools that we can imagine, iterating on that we've already started, or building new to kind of accelerate this ecosystem, or leaning into existing mechanisms and existing public-private partnerships. We could guide our performers more effectively by giving them kind of self-served tools, self-assessment tools, things that are interactive and respond to changes in policy or changes in the product. We could think about, especially for companies that don't have a dedicated government affairs or reimbursement function, getting them access in a democratized way to a shared set of experts with pricing that is competitive with what you might see for a larger company. And we may be providing analyses that support specific decisions and defining what each of these elements look like. What are the key things that a new innovator often misses? What are the elements that we need to prioritize in a consultant? What is the kind of collection of consultants and niches that we have to address? Those are the types of areas that we designed the survey to collect specific feedback on. And we expect to really turn those in some sense into requirements to help us drive capabilities like these. But really, we left a lot of spaces for people to share their pain points. We know as engineers and designers that sometimes jumping right to the solution is not the best way to get to the best answer. So there's space to share what challenges you face, share ideas or the beginnings of ideas that we can explore further. And we hope that out of the survey, we'll also reach out to many of you to have follow-on conversations around capabilities and ideas that you've brought forward in this world. We'll talk a little bit more about logistics as Brenna closes out this section, but wanted to emphasize that we'll be closing the survey on February 21st. We'll be having conversations throughout that time with teams and afterwards, and really want to thank you for your attention. And we'll shift to Brenna to share some logistics and bring us to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Arun, and really looking forward to connecting today and asking some questions. Before we kick off, I'd like to just remind folks, if you have any questions today, we invite you to please ask those questions inside our Q&A tool. We'll be working through them as they come. But to kick us off today, our first question from the audience is, in addition to our four groups that we just named, would you also like to hear from VCs or other private investors?
Sure, I can start this one. I think we would love to hear from venture capitalists and other funders who think about what drives their decision making. Um, we lean on our Investor Catalyst Hub to sometimes have those conversations. But for those of you who haven't already been connected in, I think it's great to submit not only so we see your answers, so that you become part of our broader network. I think the other place, and really the reason that I'd be excited about a VC being engaged with this material is to send us to your portfolio companies or send us to the kind of the counterfactuals, like the groups that you would have funded if they'd had a reimbursement strategy or had a path to market, so that they can share with us with their pain points, and we can hopefully make some of those companies that may not be investable today into the technology leaders of kind of the next set of healthcare innovations.
Thank you. And thinking about these core groups, we're talking about med tech developers, payers, providers, consultants, and otherwise. Are there individual roles that you're hoping might fill this out across those different groups?
Sure. Excuse me, I'll walk through a few and then, please follow up if there are other niches that you think would be valuable. I think for the medtech developers, it can be the individuals who are really thinking about driving the product holistically. It could be specifically reimbursement, but it could also be heads of product, CEOs who've seen that full journey. Because while we're a little bit interested in the technical elements, I think it's really the pain points and the strategic decisions that we can help guide smaller companies. We won't be able to answer that for them, but we can get them the right resources or give them the patterns that we've seen be successful. For something like a healthcare provider or a system, we really want folks on both ends of the spectrum. Individual providers are often the ones who bring new technologies um, in a evaluation and evidence generation perspective into a system. So we want to understand, how do you decide to pilot something? How do you decide whether a technology is worth your time to take meetings, to mentor, to bring into the clinic, to manage the safety of your patients? So that's a really critical viewpoint. But we're also interested on the other end of this whole journey, whether it's to private payers or integrated healthcare system, and that is asking, who are the ones who make purchase decisions ultimately? And once that the data is out there, who is looking through that to decide how to build out a new hospital, how to upgrade a given workflow? So anybody who's involved from that range, from piloting to purchasing, we want to get your perspectives. For payers, I think the simple answer is medical directors. I think people are always looking for medical directors, so we know your time is valuable, but our hope is that some of the common questions and issues that you run into are ones that we can address across our portfolio so that teams do approach you at the right time with the right evidence. For consultants, associates, and associations, I think it really is anyone who has experience across multiple devices, either in helping generate that data or on the association side, helping build that case or evaluate it. And I think for public-private partnerships, really anybody who's been part of building those relationships and has an idea of where they're successful and where we can play a convening role, we'd love to hear from.
Fabulous. We have another audience question here. Your presentation seemed to be focused on Medicare reimbursement. However, depending on the patient population, private reimbursement may be the most relevant goal, i.e., majority of patients under 65 years old. And the biggest challenge to achieve broad adoption of FDA-approved products, i.e., diagnostic devices. Are you focusing on this aspect as well?
Absolutely. And it's a really important point and something that we talk about a lot internally. While the study that we pulled data from is focused on a combination of national coverage determinations and local coverage determinations, excuse me, which are Medicare decisions, they also focused on kind of new billing codes and implicit coverage through individual payment decisions, and that can happen in a private setting or a commercial setting, in addition to a government setting. And when we talk about this, we talk about payer endpoints. And while we're interested, of course, in Medicare, a lot of the places where the market has not delivered transformative technologies are pediatric populations, are smaller rare disease populations that can affect someone before they hit that 65-year cutoff. So we are very interested in insights there. And I think when we talk about the payer population, we're just as interested in hearing from private payers, from workers' comp plans, state Medicare, Medicaid plans, as well as integrated payer and providers, which I think have a really unique incentive for driving public health outcomes, which is something that ARPA-H also cares a lot about.
Wonderful, thank you. One of the questions we've received from a number of different folks so far, when you're talking about the output, whether these are some of the trainings that might happen or some of the services that could be provided to ARPA-H funded performers, when we're thinking about the responses that folks are going to say in the survey, how will that data be used? How will some of their responses be shared?
Sure. So I think I might take the kind of logistical part of this, and then Miriam, I think, given all the services that she manages for the agency, can expand a little bit on it. Um, one thing we kind of hear behind that question is a concern about who sees the data, who sees that connection. And I think it's important to note that your insights will not be kind of associated with your name beyond kind of the small group that's doing analysis. And that applies for our partners and other agencies, because we know many of you have active matters with the FDA or CMS, for example, and none of your insights would be kind of attached to a team or attached to a product. So don't expect kind of any link between your name and what you share with us beyond our small analysis group. So that's kind of how we think about protecting that data and making sure that any insights are really shared in the aggregate.
Miriam would
Yeah.
like to add anything?
No, I think at our page we try to work closely with industry and incorporate private sector insights. So we work with experts in reimbursement and other fields, regulatory, other fields, and they all work closely with our program managers. They are under confidentiality agreements, so we work really closely with them, so we have a lot of experience working with people in these sectors in the past, and we plan to tap into those experts again, the industry experts in this effort as well. So.
Wonderful. A question we hear across different ARPA-H initiatives: if I am an international company, am I allowed to fill this survey out?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing as a commercialization team, we're obviously focused on outcomes that are important for the American public. We also realize that sometimes building a sustainable business model requires having a really large total addressable market. And we don't expect these solutions, even though they may come to Americans very quickly, to not have an impact globally and not create a sustainable business model for partners. We also know there's a lot of different variation in models across the world. And we also know innovators from across the world often see success as getting into the US market. So whether you have insight into how this works in other parts of the world, or whether you are hoping to enter the US market and are based elsewhere, we'd love to get your insights.
Wonderful. So we're going to just do a quick final call for any questions here. We've worked our way through some of the pressing audience questions we have. So I'll give ourselves just a moment just to announce that to the group we have here. If you do have any questions that you would like us to answer, please float those into our Q&A tool now. Wonderful. Okay, so one of the things we're looking at is if I am a med tech developer, does it matter that I'm a 3-person startup or a 10,000 person company? Are you looking for certain types of developers?
I think we expect that different types of organizations will have very different problems and challenges. So one of the questions you'll see in there is a kind of a simple scale question around how big an organization are you? And of course, when we go through the data, we'll uh, kind of analyze it with that lens. We love to hear from small companies because we find that that's where the most variability is. Some folks are, serial founders. They're folks who've been through established established incubators and accelerators. Others are really following a technology that they're passionate about for the first time. And understanding that variation is really important for us because that helps us tailor what types of services we might build and also helps us assess quickly, who is it that needs help and who is it that just needs resources, and we have to just get out of the way because we know there's a lot of variation in what makes a good team.
Absolutely. And I think our next question is a good kind of follow on to that. This person is also working in the reimbursement space and trying to think about this from many different angles and ask the question, is it possible that the delay in reimbursement is helpful, that therapies may actually improve over time? Is this something you're looking to discover throughout the responses?
Yeah, no, it's something that it's an interesting framing. I thought when you started the question, you'd ask, is the delay useful because it gives us more time to really understand how a solution works? And that is often the question that we've heard from health plans is just how does the solution work in my population, whether that's regional, age-based, service members. When you think about a therapy improving over time, though, I think and you should please clarify, it sounds like you might be getting a little bit at how does the administration, the adherence around it, the way that a physician uses it improve over time. So maybe you want that exploration to happen first before you kind of jump into deploying it at scale. I think that's a great kind of question to ask. And I think when we talk about public-private partnerships and accelerating things like evidence generation, we I think value those steps, but ask again that question, can we compress it? Can we bring that kind of ARPA-H ambition and say, can you close that gap very rapidly by accelerating that learning process, accelerating the improvement in that therapy, whether it's optimization, cost reduction, or administration, by bringing people together around it in a different way with the right motivation and the right kind of hope around this transformative technology. So I don't think we necessarily want that gap to go to zero, and that's not how we frame the challenge. But I think there is still a lot of room for speeding up deployment and learning around new technologies.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight. All right. With no further questions for the day, we're going to end early, especially knowing we're entering a 3-day weekend for some. So really excited to have this survey live, sharing with you all here now some quick reminders. This survey will be open for the next 5 weeks, and it will close on Friday, February 21st. Please feel free to share this far and wide with your networks. We're looking to collect information, again, from medical technology developers, insurance payers, healthcare providers, and all of our partners across the ecosystem, whether they're advocates, consultants, associations, anyone really who touches the reimbursement ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining us today for this information session, and really looking forward to hearing from you all.
And for those still on the line, I did see an additional question, which I think is a useful one. I totally understand for folks who have been dropping. And it's really asking, what does it mean to make a meaningful improvement in health? And simply focusing on reimbursement without asking that question, is this making a real improvement, which is a non-scientific and kind of a cultural, or I should say societal question, is a good one. And I think that's really what the ARPA model on the upfront piece is about. Anything that we are going to be focused on is going to be tackling a challenge that had to go through a lot of vetting internally, where you have to make the case that this is the best use of taxpayer dollars, that if we were to hit this big kind of home run in technology, it would make a meaningful difference. So it's really at that point, when we're framing the problem and understanding what our requirements are for a new solution, where we kind of establish that health value as unambiguously as we can before we would kind of invest these commercialization resources and really help specific products get to market. So thanks for that question, Shannon.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and look forward to reading your responses in the survey. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.